Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kat, and today we're having a conversation about getting from your Walt Disney World Resort hotel to your theme park of choice in time to take full advantage of extra theme park hours. I always slip up on that. It's early theme park entry. I keep wanting to say extra magic hours. Anyway, this, for those of you who might not already be aware, is a perk for guesting at Walt Disney World Resort hotels or at other participating hotels. It allows you into the theme parks 30 minutes prior to the park opening to day guests and gives you a bit of a leg up on enjoying everything that the park has to offer before the crowds really start to build. So this conversation was inspired by Kim, who left a comment on one of our previous videos. They're going to be staying at Pop Century. They're really excited. They're doing their research, which is fantastic. And they had a question about whether or not taking a ride share in order to avoid some of the congestion on Disney transportation was a good option. So I wanted to respond, but I didn't want to just leave a comment and kind of just leave it there. I wanted to have this conversation with all of you because I think that it's something a lot of you will benefit from, and there are some of you out there who might have differing opinions from mine, and I'd love if you share them in the comments down below so that Kim and other foolish mortals and happy haunts have an idea of what to expect when visiting Walt Disney World. Now, before we jump into the discussion head first, I do want to just give a little bit of background so that you know where I'm coming from. So currently I live in Orlando. I have moved down here recently. I go to the theme parks all the time. But prior to the past couple of months, all of my visits to Walt Disney World have involved staying at a Walt Disney World Resort hotel. So I've had the ability to experience and play with this early theme park entry, and I have a lot of opinions based on those past experiences. But I also visit the parks and go first thing in the morning as well here. So I do rope drop as someone who's staying off property or just a day guest, and I have opinions based on that too. So I'm going to share those with you. I also have some experience with taking a rideshare service around Walt Disney World, and we're gonna talk about that as well. So everything's going to kind of get smushed into one, and hopefully we can have a well-rounded conversation. Okay, now let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's discussion. There are so many different ways that we can start talking about this topic, but I've decided to start today's discussion talking about the concept of arriving at the theme parks early. It's like the one thing that when I'm at the parks early, when I'm talking to people, when I'm overhearing people talk about how things didn't go right for them, it all kind of comes down to a misunderstanding of what early actually means. Now, of course, everyone vacations differently and everyone has different priorities, capabilities, and whatnot. I want to be very clear. I'm not trying to tell you what you need to do. I'm just telling you what I think needs to happen based on my experiences in order to achieve the things you think you want to achieve, or tell you what is necessary in order to achieve those things. You might not be willing to do what I think is necessary to do. I'm often not willing to do it. That's totally fine, but it doesn't make any of what I'm about to say any less true. So just keep that in mind. I'm of the opinion that arriving somewhere early, particularly in regards to Walt Disney World, whether it's the gates or your transportation option, whatever that is, means arriving at that point you want to be at 45 minutes to an hour prior to it actually opening. So for example, if the Skyliner starts running at 6 a.m., you want to be there at 5 a.m. The same can be said for arriving at the theme parks, like at the gates where you're going to boop your magic band and go in. So for example, if the theme parks open at 7:30 a.m. for early theme park entry, I'm of the opinion that arriving early means being there in line and ready to go at 6:30 or thereabouts. Making this happen means you're gonna have to wake up early. You're gonna have to get in line for that transportation option if you're staying on property early. If you're driving, it means getting in your car and driving to the toll plaza to be there early. Now, of course, we can't always be right at the gate exactly an hour or more than an hour in advance. But what we can do, especially if you're using Disney transportation or if you're going to be driving in and parking your car, is get in line prior to that first bus, the first boat, prior to the parking lots opening, prior to the Skyliner running. Now, if I listen carefully, I can hear some of you grumbling, and I totally understand. I mean, if we go by what I'm suggesting here, you're staying at a Walt Disney World Resort hotel, and let's say the park opens at 7:30, I'm recommending getting to the bus stop or your transportation option by 6. That means if you're an average family, it takes you an hour to get ready. You gotta have that alarm going off at like 5. That's early, and it's too early for some people, and I totally understand that. But it's important to be well aware that just because it's too early for you and your family doesn't mean that it's too early for other families. There are going to be more families out there who are motivated to make that choice, to get up early and to get there and to be the first in line. And while it might not sound fun, it might not sound magical, those are the families who are going to be ahead of you in line. And I assure you, they will be ahead of you in line. Even in the past, when I've been like, oh, I'm definitely ahead of the curve, I'm getting here as soon as I can, I've been behind a significant number of people, because just like you should never assume that you're the smartest person in the room, you should also never assume that you're the most motivated person at Walt Disney World to beat the crowds. They're out there and they're willing to do almost anything. But like I said, that might not be your style, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that's where we start to get into that whole discussion of having reasonable and realistic expectations, not only of Disney and the things that you'll experience at the theme parks and of the weather and whatnot, but also of what you and your family are capable of and willing to do. So that's something you have to decide ahead of time. We'll have a discussion about that some other day, just for the sake of time, because I could talk about that forever. Now, before we move on from this, I just want to share a little bit of a tip. What I like to do, especially when I'm out there early, waiting for the bus, waiting for the Skyliner, waiting for whatever it is, I like to pack my breakfast and a nice cold drink, or maybe a hot coffee, whatever it is. I like to pack that and bring it with me, so it's all ready to go the night before, and then I wake up, get dressed, do a little bit of makeup, head out the door with my breakfast, with my coffee, whatever, and I enjoy that while I'm waiting for that transportation option to arrive. So we're not wasting time. Yeah, we're waking up early, but we're still using that time efficiently. At least that's my suggestion. That's what I like to do. Naturally, since we're talking about Disney transportation, the next thing I really want to kind of share my experience with is the state of Disney transportation, how sluggish it can be, how crowded it can be. Now, this is something that Kim mentioned, and the reality of the situation is that yes, Disney transportation is flawed in a number of ways, but all transportation options are flawed in a number of ways, including taking a rideshare. We'll get to that here in a minute, but I want to start off with Disney transportation, the different transportation options. So in my experience, yes, Disney transportation can absolutely be crowded, especially if you're staying at a really popular resort, and it can be really challenging, especially if you're staying at a place like Saratoga Springs. I know that Kim specifically is staying at Pop Century, but if you're staying at a resort that has multiple stops, it can be super frustrating, because sometimes, especially if you're at the end of that loop, you might find yourself in a position where the bus is already full before you were able to get on. This is just the reality of the situation. It's how it sometimes goes. I have some tips and tricks for that, but the biggest tip, trick, way that you can avoid finding yourself in that situation is arriving at the bus stop, arriving at the boat dock, arriving at the Skyliner early, which is already what we've been talking about. So I don't feel like we have to go too much more into that. It's just a matter of arriving there early. And again, remember how I mentioned those people, those of you out there right now who might be grumbling about getting there early? Keep in mind that those people are going to be the ones who arrive to the bus, Skyliner, monorail, boat later, and they're going to be the ones who, I think, ultimately complain about how many people end up on those transportation options, just because they weren't early enough to get in the line sooner, to avoid having to wait for the next vehicle, whatever that is, and that's gonna play a role in when they can actually arrive at the parks. And I don't say this, I want to be very clear, I don't say this because I'm like just assuming. I'm saying this because I have heard conversations like this when I'm getting on the monorail, when I'm getting on the Skyliner, when I'm getting on buses or on boats. There are a lot of people who can't believe that they have to wait. But when I look at the time, it's already after the park has opened, not only for early theme park entry, but also for just day guests. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's important to be aware that timing is key. So I personally, again, recommend getting there early or avoiding that rush altogether and arriving later in the day. Of course, arriving later means you're not taking advantage of that early theme park entry. It means you might end up waiting in longer lines elsewhere, but that's a discussion for another day. It's an option though. It is an option. Now personally, like I've said, I always just try and get to the bus stop early, and I've never run into a major issue with getting to the theme parks in time for early theme park entry. In fact, in the past year, when staying at various Walt Disney World resort hotels and when staying at the Walt Disney World Swan, I didn't run into any problems taking Disney transportation or the Swan's transportation and getting to the parks in time to participate in early theme park entry. Now, I think there was 1 or 2 times when I was there early enough that I had to wait in order to get in for early theme park entries. So that might be interesting for those of you who are wondering if that's possible. It absolutely is possible, but it's possible if you're leaving early, you're arriving at that bus, monorail, boat, whatever, early, but it can also not be the case. You know, like I said, reasonable, realistic expectations of Disney and their transportation. While everything right now does feel like it's back to normal, there are still problems here at Walt Disney World, including staffing problems, which sometimes mean less buses, sometimes mean something happens and they can't get a bus out to you as fast as you would have liked. So that's something that can happen, and problems occur. Disney might be the most magical place on earth, but it doesn't run on Disney magic alone. Sometimes things go wrong. So it's an important thing to be aware of. It's an important thing to keep in mind, especially in this whole discussion we're having. Okay, the part all of you have been waiting for. Let's talk about taking a ride share. So you don't want to deal with Disney transportation. Maybe you don't want to wake up super early. What's the deal with taking a ride share? It's a suggestion a lot of people make. It's one a lot of people take. I've done it myself. I will say right off the bat that taking a ride share to your Disney destination of choice can be a really great option, but it's only an option you should consider and lean into, at least in my opinion, if you are going to be heading out early. This isn't a last minute decision. That usually doesn't work out very well. And if you have the money to make it work, even if things go wrong. Now, full disclosure, I'm about to give an example that doesn't quite fit this scenario, but I do think that it's important to note this, okay? So back last year, I don't remember exactly when it was now that I think about it, but I was staying in Celebration, and that's not very far from Walt Disney World. I didn't have a rental car, anything like that, and I was like, I'm gonna go grab some dinner. So my plan was I was gonna take a ride share, leave Celebration, head to Disney Springs, get some dinner, and then head back whenever. It was a last minute decision, tried to find a ride, and first of all, it was $60 without a tip, around $60 one way. So there was that, and there were no cars in my area. But fortunately, it was a last minute decision, something I wanted to try. Didn't really know if I was going to be able to do it though, so I just kind of adjusted my plans and went from there. The next day, when I was trying to get to the Swan, because that's where I was going to be staying, I had scheduled a ride share to pick me up at a particular time, but as that time rolled around, I wasn't able to get a car to pick me up. In fact, I think it was 2 or 3 times the app had me like waiting so long that it was like, maybe you should just try later. And so I ended up having to upgrade to a different vehicle, which cost me significantly more than I had intended on paying. And I still had to wait an hour to get from my hotel to my new hotel. So I mention this because although I'm not talking about going from a Walt Disney World Resort hotel to somewhere else on Walt Disney World property, I mention this because the possibility is there that you'll, number one, experience surge pricing, probably especially during the beginning of the day. I also experienced it around dinner time, but the possibility is there that you can even schedule yourself a ride share and it won't be there to pick you up when you think it will. So you have to accept that that possibility exists, at least in my opinion, and be ready to deal with that if you find yourself in that position. Of course, that kind of puts you in the same position as if you were just to take Disney transportation, except Disney transportation is free and you're paying for that rideshare service. Now, if you're prepared to pay, you're prepared to take that risk, that's awesome, and there are plenty of people who do that all the time and don't run into any issues. But if you're not prepared to pay for that, you're not prepared to take that risk, maybe Disney transportation isn't a bad option. In fact, I don't think it's a bad option at all. So let's move on to the last point that I really want to make, and this is kind of sharing my personal experiences recently going to the parks. So as you guys know, I live in Orlando. I live right down the street from Disney, and so I'm at Disney all the time. But of course, I'm not staying on property, so I don't have access to early theme park entry like someone staying on property would. But I still do try and get there early. I mean, I want to beat the heat. I want to get in the parks and enjoy as much as I can. And so I'll often arrive just prior to, if not at, that opening time, that rope drop for day guests. And even arriving at that time or just after that time, I still find that the wait times tend to be lower than they're going to be later in the day. So I can usually still get on an attraction without having to wait too long. And sometimes, I mean, goodness, in the case of Animal Kingdom, I have the ability to roam the entire park with it being almost empty. I've actually had similar experiences over at Epcot as well. And that's just arriving at the normal opening time for the park, not for early theme park entry. So in that case, I do think it's very possible to take Disney transportation, get there, even if you're getting there just before the park opens to normal day guests. You still have plenty of opportunity to experience some attractions with lower wait times and get into the park before most day guests arrive. In fact, I've been paying attention, especially in the past week since Kim left that comment. I noticed that people, you know, those ones who don't want to get up, they want a more relaxed vacation, they tend to arrive at the theme parks around 9, 10, 11 o'clock. It doesn't matter what theme park we're talking about. They tend to arrive a little bit later in the morning. So if you can arrive prior to that rush anyway, you're still making out pretty well, at least in my experience. Like I said, I'm there all the time, and this is what I'm experiencing. Sometimes I'll go kind of casually around like 9 o'clock when the park has been open for an hour or even an hour and a half if you consider early theme park entry. And I never really have that much of a problem. It's around that 10 o'clock mark, 11 o'clock, after lunch, completely forget about it. The lines are out of control. But it's around that time when things start to get a little crowded, lines start to get longer and whatnot. All this having been said, what would I do if I was Kim? Well, I'm not. And I don't know what exactly it is that you want to accomplish with your family or those you're traveling with. But if I was me, I would probably skip the rideshare. And rather than spending that $20, $25, maybe even $30, depending on the tip and whatever they're charging at the time that you happen to get a rideshare, I would just get up early, eat my breakfast while I'm waiting for Disney transportation, get on Disney transportation, get to the parks whenever I do, be really decisive about what it is that I want to do. If I was going to spend the money or consider spending the money on a rideshare anyway, I'd probably skip that and buy just the individual Lightning Lane selections for the really popular rides like Rise of the Resistance, Flight of Passage, Mickey and Minnie's, Runaway Railway, Cosmic Rewind, although you can currently get a virtual queue, so I'd probably skip the Lightning Lane for that one. And I'd focus by spending my money on those attractions and then go for my number 2 attraction that I really want to ride at whatever park first thing in the morning. So let's talk about Hollywood Studios, okay? Let's say I really want to ride Rise of the Resistance. So if I get there early as I can, maybe I'll buy the individual lightning lane for Rise of the Resistance. I'll save the money on buying an individual lightning lane for Mickey and Minnie's, and I'll just ride that first thing in the morning in an attempt to avoid the biggest lines and avoid the heat of the day. That's another great perk of arriving early, so you don't have to wait in line when it's so hot. Then the other attractions that I want to ride kind of more casually, I can decide whether or not I want to wait in line for them as the day goes on, and save that like other really big attraction with a really long line, Slinky Dog, for the end of the night when the sun has gone down, it's cool, and it's not as much of a big deal to wait. That would be the route that I would go. And I have a similar plan for all of the theme parks. Again, it's about having realistic expectations and prioritizing what it is that you want to do. So if you prioritize those things you really want to do, if there is an individual lightning lane selection for one of them, go ahead and get that for one if you're willing to spend the money, instead of going and getting a ride share, in my opinion, and then just wait in line for the other one. It's worked for us. In fact, I usually don't buy the individual lightning lane selection. I just wait in line, but I also have plenty of time right now, and I tend to not wait in really, really long lines. Unless there are certain attractions like Flight of Passage, I'll wait in a really long line because most of the queue is indoors, and I'll be willing to do that right before I leave the park midday because it's a great opportunity to cool off in the air conditioning. And I've got a bunch of little tips and tricks like that, and if you have any, feel free to leave them in the comments down below because the list of tips and tricks is really, really long. Anyway, I hope that this kind of gave you an idea of how to make things work, whether you're taking a rideshare or not. As I say so many times, my goal is not to change minds here, but to help you make up your mind. If you're really solid on taking a rideshare, that's awesome. I think that's a great plan if that's the plan you want to go with. If you're really solid on just doing Disney transportation, that's a great option too. And you should definitely do that if that's what you've got your mind set on. But if you're kind of wishy-washy, you're on the fence, hopefully this helps you figure out what is right for you. But of course, I want to hear from you guys. I want to know what you think is the best route to go. What's your plan? What do you normally do? What have your past experiences been? Leave them in the comments. And Kim, don't forget to let us know your thoughts, what you're thinking about going with, and hopefully you'll stop by after you get back from your trip and let us know what option you went for and how it worked out for you. We'd all love to hear about it. But that's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.